In our last session, we were talking about curatorial theory, especially as it relates to ontology, epistemology, methodology, and axiology. Now we are going to move into direct application. So we're going to talk about this process of researching, planning, and proposing an exhibit. And you will be going through most of these steps as part of your final project. Albeit hypothetically, you will be activating these steps that we talk about today. So you can be expecting to be actually doing this in writing as part of what will become your portfolio. In many ways, a template that you can follow when you are producing or proposing exhibits in any other venues. So this is a very brief overview of this process. We start with an idea. And then based on that idea, depending where we are, because if we are working for a museum or a cultural center already, we are surveying what we have already to determine, in this case, that's what you're doing here. For example, at the Institute, if you're working in the collections or in the archives, you are surveying what is available and then deciding, is there enough material that's available that fits a certain theme that you want to put together? Is there a story that you could tell using these objects? It's actually an amazing exercise in creativity. And if you are proposing an exhibit to a gallery or another museum, you may be surveying their collections, or you may actually be doing research in the field. That means you may be looking at other artists, other galleries, other museums, other work that's available that may not have been part of an exhibit before. That's one of the things that's challenging, particularly in the 21st century with so much media that's available and so much that can be viewed online in real time, is that how do you produce something new that hasn't been done already, that hasn't been done before? Now, 50 years ago, it was very common that an audience in Los Angeles did not know what was going on in Chicago or New York. That's changed because of mass media, because of the web, because of this ability now to communicate with each other very quickly. So whether you're working as an independent, as a freelance curator, or whether you're working for a museum or a cultural center, you're still doing some type of assessment of what's there so that you can think of an idea that would pull all of these objects and works together into a theme that you can present, that you can tell a story. That's really what you're doing, is you're telling a story. So you also then are not only to determine whether there is enough material out there that you can produce something that has depth. In other words, it has enough substance to it that people are going to benefit from it, the institution is going to benefit from it, that you can in many ways educate but enlighten and enrich the lives of people not only within the museum but also visitors, anyone else who may be interested. But you're also going to assess the viability of a project. Viability is, can it really happen? You can have an amazing idea, but it may not be viable. There may not be enough work that's available. You may not have the funding that's available. You may not have the personnel or the venue, all right, the actual place where it could be done. So these are all the kinds of viability that we are assessing. But you also, in your research, as we were talking about last week, you want to make sure then, as you are compiling the body of information that is going to support this exhibit, that you have really considered the ontology of the sources of information. This is critical when we're looking at indigenous studies and indigenous curation and really changing the methodology of how research has been done and is being done within our own native communities and other native communities around the world. So not only are we assessing source ontology, epistemology, and axiology, but most important as we're carrying this out, the methodology. We're considering this as we're looking at all of these sources, all of these ways of thinking, so that we are doing work that is culturally appropriate, that is ethical, that can be done, and people will benefit from. So the kinds of resources that we have available to us. Now this may seem obvious, but I'm still obligated to talk about this with you because if you're here and this is your first semester, you may not have done any research here, for example, in the library, at the IAI library, and may not even have an idea of what's available in the IAI library. But it's not just this library here. There are several other libraries in town that are amazing sources of information. That includes the School of American Research. There are archives over in the Folklore Museum. There are archives available for the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. There are archives available right on Cerrillos Road at the State Archives. There is a vast amount of information available in Santa Fe, probably, especially related to art, disproportionate to the size of the city and the population. Another thing you find in Santa Fe is that there are more churches per person in this city than anywhere else. There are more galleries per person. There are probably more hotels and restaurants per person than anywhere else. There is more information about art in this town per capita than probably any other major city in the country, state capital in the country. So we have a vast amount of information that's available. So you're not only going through the libraries, so do not limit yourself just to the library here at IAIA, which is pretty darn good. And that would include books as well as catalogs. Most of the catalogs are on reserve. You can't take them out of the library, but you can still have access to them. And these would be things that are discussing the relevant ideas and the works that may have been produced. We have the historical archives, where we can get periodicals, posters, press releases. Now, when I was in college, it was a really big thing to be able to go to look at something, and it would be on microfiche. Microfiche is like film, and you would put it into a microfiche player, and then you would turn a crank, or it might even be motorized, so you could fast forward it back and forward, and it would show you, in essence, documents that had been photographed and put on film, and then you could look at them in an analog manner. They weren't searchable. In other words, if you wanted to find a certain document, you had to go through the whole reel, although they might be indexed, but you would still have to go and turn this crank or move the motor until you came to the appropriate frame. As compared to now, with the digitization of objects and information, you can now just Google stuff. And in many libraries, you can just do keyword searches in their database to come up with the relevant information. We're still in the process of doing that here, as Ryan had mentioned. All right, they're in the process of doing this so that it becomes accessible dang near instantly. It cuts your research time into hundredths of the time that it used to take, as well as saves gas. You also are going to be learning about other exhibits that are on the artist or the themes that are being explored. This is an amazing thing now with the internet, because you can Google this and find out if certain artists are visible, if they have been shown in other shows. And if so, what was the theme of that show, or how was this artist presented? So you can find a bold, new, and innovative way of presenting this work, or this artist, or this body of work. So the internet is an astounding resource where you can Google not only exhibitions, artists, themes, curators, museums, and the like. One of the things to be aware when you are Googling information and you are starting to get what I would call documentably viable, verifiable, and credible information. Not incredible, but credible, means believable. Go with your .edus, your .orgs, your .govs first. Once you get into .com, it's the Old West. There is piracy on the internet highway. There are some things you could plug in. You just plug in Jackson Pollock, and you're going to find the exact same article, the exact same works on Jackson Pollock on 200 different sites, and you don't know which is the source site. And for that matter, if it was inaccurate information, you may be, in essence, passing along inaccuracies. So be aware of .coms because of plagiarism and inaccuracy of information. Generally, your .govs, .orgs, and .edus, they are policed for plagiarism as well as accuracy.